Hi, welcome to another edition of the Alan Rosenberg Show. So I was at work this afternoon, and all of a sudden I got hit by inspiration for a video, and I told my coworker. So we all know the story. Every artist has basically their career, so to speak, to make their debut album. Songs they've been playing live forever, and they know the songs inside out. And then the problem is that if the debut album is a big success, now there's a lot of pressure, and they got to relatively quickly put together a second album, which is why oftentimes you'll see, quote unquote, the sophomore slump. But there's not always a sophomore slump. And it occurred to me, yeah, there's plenty of second albums that are really excellent and almost as good as their first album. But what are the occasions where the second album is actually better than the debut album? And that's my premise for this video. And what I gathered here are 17 examples, in my opinion, of the case where the second album is actually better than the debut album. So that's my premise, and I hope you enjoy it. We're going to do it in alphabetical order. I think I picked out 17, and let's get to it. So the first one may be, quote-unquote, a little controversial. I don't know if everybody's going to agree with this one, but it's certainly the case for me. And if you follow music and you like the band, Robbie Robertson, everybody knows this legendary album. This is, of course, music from Big Pink, the classic, and I mean classic debut album from the band. And I love this album as well, and you can't really, there's the track listing. So that's the track listing plus a whole bunch of bonus tracks for the debut album from the band, the classic music from Big Pink, which sort of changed music, right, at that time. Influenced a lot of people. But for me, the second album, which some people call the Brown Album, which is just called The Band, for me, I like this album much better. I think it's far superior. Not that that's not a great album, but this, to me, is a better album. And this is the Brown Album from the band, and you can see the track listing, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, Up on Cripple Creek, Whispering Pines, oh my God, Look Out Cleveland, Rockin' Chair, Jawbone, Unfaithful Servant, King Harvest, Across the Great Divide, Rag Mama Rag. It doesn't get any better, in my opinion, than this album. So, the first choice of the second album being better than the debut album is the Brown Album, the self-titled album from the band. Let's keep going. For me, this is also a no-brainer, and this is two classic albums from Black Sabbath. You all know this one. This is the classic debut from Black Sabbath, and it's got some classic songs, including the title track, right, The Wizard. Here's the debut album. But at least for me, and I think probably for most people who like Black Sabbath, Paranoid, the second album, is far superior. War Pigs, Paranoid, Iron Man, Electric Funeral, Only Fairies Wear Boots, come on. So, second album, Paranoid, better than the debut album for Black Sabbath. Let's keep going. More latter-day thing, and this is Blur. Their debut album is Leisure. Decent record, She's So High, great track. Although this is definitely one of my lesser favorite Blur albums. The second album they did is Modern Life is Rubbish. And I think for me, For Tomorrow, a bunch of other tracks on here, it is a far superior album than the debut, and Blur would only get better, in my opinion as well. All right, there's 3 so far. Let's keep going in alphabetical order. And this is Bob Dylan. His debut album, just called Bob Dylan, made up a lot of like folk songs, traditional tribe songs, House of the Rising Sun, etc. A fine album for sure, of course. It is Bob Dylan. But, at least in my opinion, his second album, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, was much superior. Blowing in the World. Go look at this. Girl from the North Country. Masters of War. Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. I mean, this is quite an improvement, I think, over the debut album. Bob Dylan and Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. Now this one, kind of a little bit interesting. Genesis, this is a little bit tough because they changed so much. Their debut album, which nobody bought when it originally came out, was called From Genesis to Revelation. This is a latter-day pressing on CD, of course, with a bunch of bonus tracks. It's actually, I think, a pretty fine record. It certainly doesn't sound anything really like latter-day Genesis. There's short songs. Some of it almost sounds to me like a Bee Gees pastiche, really good vocal harmonies. And I don't mean that in a negative. It's a fine record. But their second album is Trespass, and a little bit of a different band, of course. And this is starting to get to their classic sound of Genesis. They still had a way to go. But Trespass, far superior, and heading on the path of becoming latter-day Genesis. The Knife, of course, a classic. But I've actually grown to really like this album a lot. I got it decades and decades ago, and I always thought the vinyl sounded terrible. I had the original vinyl as an import, and it was just not a good sounding record. The latter-day pressing of this is far superior. Now, if you wanted to keep going, and we're not going to, but their third album, Nursery Crime, is even far superior than Trespass, and they really developed into the classic Genesis that I love. But we're only comparing the second album to the first, Trespass, over From Genesis to Revelation. Next up, Jefferson Airplane. It's a pretty easy one because the original Jefferson Airplane didn't even have Grace Slick in it. But Jefferson Airplane Takes Off is actually a pretty fine record, and I like it. Blues from an Airplane, It's No Secret, Come Up the Years. It's a really cool album, and I like it, and I think it's a bit on the underrated side. But with that said, I would tell you that Sure Elastic Pillow, their follow-up, is one of the greatest albums of all time, and I think their best album. And there's the track listing: Somebody to Love, Today, White Rabbit, Embryonic Journey, Plastic Fantastic Lover. They don't really get better than that album. Far superior than Jefferson Airplane Takes Off. Sure Elastic Pillow from the Jefferson Airplane. Alphabetical order, we shall continue with, let's do this one before we forget. Jethro Tull. I'm a huge Jethro Tull fan. You watch my channel, there's a lot of Jethro Tull videos. Their first album, of course, was called This Was. This is a deluxe box set of it. And this is a fine record for what it is. I really like it. I actually grew to appreciate it even more when I got this box set because I heard it like another 10 times. But, of course, the Mick Abrahams version, which is what this is very different to the next version with Martin Barr, where they really started becoming a more current version of Jethro Tull, and that's the stand-up album. No doubt, as much as I like This Was Jethro Tull, Stand Up is a far superior album from Jethro Tull. So, this is the stand-up elevated edition from Stand Up. Good fun, right? So let's stick that over there. I do not want you falling. David, don't fall. Okay, next up, Billy Joel. I'm here on Long Island, and if you live on Long Island, it's Billy Joel Island. And his first album is called Cold Spring Harbor. And some actually good songs on there. She's Got Away, but the album really didn't do very well. Nocturne. Kind of a hidden album from Billy Joel to this day, really. His next album, his second album, was Piano Man. Obviously far more successful with the legendary title track and some other tracks as well. Ballad of Billy the Kid still gets played every damn day here on the radio. And of course, what's probably my favorite Billy Joel song, which is Captain Jack. So Billy Joel. Now, same kind of thread there. And in fact, of course, they've played together. I know this is going to happen. We're talking about Elton John. They kind of go together, right? Elton John's first album was Empty Sky, right there. And it's actually kind of a cool record in its own way. Not one that I go to very often, Skyline Pigeon, but it's a cool kind of album. And the next Elton John album was the self-titled one, just called Elton John. This is an album I really grew to appreciate after I got the live in Australia with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, because he went back to a bunch of these tracks. This is a great album, just lush, and it just sucks you in. Of course, your song, But I Need You to Turn To, Take Me to the Pilot, 60 Years On, Border Song, Greatest Discovery, King Must Die, great album. Elton John, the self-titled record, his second album over his debut, Empty Sky. Now this one I'm probably going to get some grief about, but I don't really care because I think it is. The first Led Zeppelin album, of course, what can you say? Pretty much every Led Zeppelin album, what can you say? And this is those deluxe editions with bonus discs. The first album, of course, is a classic. They're all classics, right? Here's the debut album, Good Times, Bad Times, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, You Shook Me, Dazed and Confused. I mean, this is just amazing. Communication Breakdown. Kind of like that original Jeff Beck Truth album, but on steroids. Problem with that album, of course, Led Zeppelin, and they did it on Led Zeppelin 2 and other albums as well, is that a lot of their stuff was like these old blues tunes that they kind of took songwriting credit for, which always kind of bothered me and bothered a lot of people, and eventually they had to pay up for it. But the second album, to me, is a drastic leap forward over the debut album. As great as the first one is, the second album is just monstrous. And again, some of this stuff was also blues old tracks that they kind of grabbed and made their own. But, you know, look at that track listing. You know, Whole Lot of Love, What Is and What Should Never Be, Lemon Song, Thank You, Heartbreaker, Living, Loving Maid, She's Just a Woman, Ramble On. Yeah. Led Zeppelin 2, I will take over Led Zeppelin, the debut. Paul McCartney, after the Beatles, I'm wearing a Ringo Starr shirt for this occasion, took a lot of guts to do the McCartney album, a really low-key album that really didn't get tremendously appreciated at its time, but it's grown over the years because it's just such a low-key album. But it's a fine listen, and I like it a lot. But what I like even more is his second album, which is, to this day, one of my favorite McCartney albums. That's Ram. And Ram is just such a cool album. I remember my sister, I think it was my sister's friends bringing it home, and I had never heard it. And they played it, I was a little kid. And I was like, this is so cool. And I still love it to this day. This is deluxe edition. Too Many People, Three Legs, Ram, Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey, of course you know, Backseat of My Car, Heart of the Country. Great album, and I think far superior than his debut. That's McCartney. Let's keep going. Where are we up to? The letter N. And that is a band that I love, and that's Nektar. And their first album was called Journey to the Center of the Eye, a really kind of experimental psych prog album that is good in its own way if you really like that psychedelic. I love the cover there. But I got to say, out of all the Nektar albums, that is one of my lesser favorite albums. And I definitely prefer their second album a lot more, which to me is a classic, and that's Tab in the Ocean. And this is a deluxe edition of Tab in the Ocean. Really cool album for sure. Only got a couple of tracks originally, but they're all great. Tab in the Ocean, Desolation Valley, Waves, Crying in the Dark, and King of Twilight. A really fine Nektar album to this day, one of my favorites. Let's keep going to the letter O, and that one is Oasis. Now, I'm here in the United States. Oasis really didn't cross over really big until their second album. But their first album, of course, worldwide over across the pond was massive, Definitely Maybe. I actually picked this album up in the United States way before their first album. So I was kind of on them from the get-go, thanks to Q Magazine and Mojo I used to read. And this is a really good record, Definitely Maybe. It's a classic, of course, Live Forever. I like it a lot. It's really loud and noisy, I always felt. And I always was like, that's the only thing. They don't really have a very delicate touch. They were just so damn loud on that album. And I always kind of wished they had a little bit more dynamic, so to speak. And I thought that they did that well. I don't want this to fall. I thought that they did that really better on their second album, What's the Story, Morning Glory. Of course, they had the huge hit with Wonderwall, and that broke them here in the United States as well. But Don't Look Back in Anger, She Casts No Shadow, Morning Glory, this is a really great album, and I prefer it over the debut. Oasis. Letter O is another band. Ocean Color Scene is a band that I really, really like. Pretty much unknown here in in the United States, but in the UK they had some really big years, and I think underrated even over there. Their debut album, Ocean Color Scene, is probably their worst record, and it's kind of different from the rest of their catalog. It's not as bad as people say it is, but it's not that great either. And the second album is probably their best album, and that is Mostly Shoals. If you don't have this album, I see it in used record stores all the time for $1 or so. Pick it up, man. You'll thank me. Every damn song in this album is great. This is a great rock, 60s, 70s, early 70s throwback kind of a thing, but they're the real deal, and every song in this album is really great. Ocean Color Scene with Mostly Shoals, their second album. We're winding down. This one might be kind of obvious to some people. Simon and Garfunkel, their first album was called Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., and basically they were kind of like young folk singers at that time, and they had some work to do, but this album did have The Sounds of Silence on it, the original version. But this is got to be the weakest of any Simon and Garfunkel album, in my opinion. And the second album, of course, is the classic Sound of Silence, where they took the track and the producers added drums to it and made it what it is. But even beyond that, this is just a great, great album. As is pretty much all the Simon and Garfunkel albums. So Sound of Silence, the second album, far superior than their first album. Another one is this one, Billy Squier. You remember Billy Squier? He actually had an album before Don't Say No, which was his second record, which was the one that broke him in the States. The debut album is called Tale of the Tape, and it's actually a fine record. This guy is a talent. Even his latter-day albums are good. He was in that band Piper. He led that band. But Tale of the Tape's got the big beat. That thing's been sampled a bunch of times, the drums, and that's a really good track. It's a fine, fine album. But Don't Say No, the second album, with In the Dark, The Stroke, My Kind of Lover, 2 Days Gone, Lonely as the Night. Man, this thing's chock full of hits, and it deserves it. Really good record from Billy Squier. And I think I got one more left, and that's going to be the letter Y, Neil Young. And his debut album was this one, Neil Young. And, it's kind of a mixed album. A lot of people don't really care for it, and I don't think it's that great either. But I think it's good. The Loner, you know that, The Old Laughing Lady. Listen, it's still Neil Young, and it's a fine album. But it ain't. Everybody knows This Is Nowhere, his second album, which is a classic for sure. There you go. Cinnamon Girl, everybody knows This Is Nowhere. Down by the River, Cowgirl in the Sand, far superior record from Neil Young. So there you have it, 17 choices of artists whose sophomore album, their second album, was superior than their debut album. Let me know what you think. What did I miss? There's a bunch of other stuff I thought about where the second album may be almost as good or maybe as good as the debut, but not superior in my mind. So maybe some of those that you're thinking might have made that list. And maybe I'll do a follow-up video where the second album is almost as good as the debut or equal. Maybe that'll be a fun video. But let me know your thoughts. Would love to hear. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you like this video, by the way, you can go to playlists on my channel. And if you go to playlists, there's a topic there called like discographies by topic. And that's where I come up with these kind of fun lists and show albums that I have. So if you like this, check out that playlist, discographies by different topics. I think you'll enjoy it. Thanks so much again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you next time on the Alan Rosenberg Show.